The lunch rush had just ended at the Silver Spoon, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Sophia Martinez wiped down her last table and paused to catch her breath. Her feet ached from the 6-hour shift, but her day was only half over. She still had the dinner service ahead of her, which meant another 8 hours on her feet, smiling politely at people who rarely looked her in the eye. "Sophia, table 7 needs water," called her manager, Mr. Reynolds, as he hurried past with a stack of freshly printed menus. She nodded and grabbed a crystal pitcher from behind the bar. As she poured water for the businessmen at table 7, she couldn't help but notice the grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant. It was mostly for show, a beautiful Steinway that the owner had purchased at auction. Occasionally on weekend evenings, the restaurant hired pianists to provide ambient music, but today it sat silent, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lighting. Sophia's fingers twitched slightly at the sight of it. 5 years had passed since she'd last touched a piano like that one. "Dreaming again?" whispered Tina, another waitress who had become Sophia's closest friend at the restaurant. "You've got that look." Sophia shook her head and forced a smile. "Just tired. Double shift today. Again. That's your 3rd this week. You're going to work yourself into the ground." "Rent doesn't pay itself," Sophia replied with a shrug. What she didn't say was that it wasn't just rent she was worried about. Her mother's medical bills had been piling up for months, and the insurance only covered so much. When her shift ended at 4 p.m., Sophia had exactly 2 hours before she needed to return for the dinner service. Not enough time to go home to her tiny Brooklyn apartment, but enough to slip into the small storage room where employees sometimes took their breaks. She sat on an overturned milk crate and pulled out a worn notebook from her bag. Opening it to a blank page, she began to move her fingers silently over the page, playing an invisible piano. She closed her eyes, hearing the music in her head, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her mother's favorite. There had been a time when Sophia's life had been filled with music. From the age of 4, when her grandmother had first sat her at an old upright piano in their living room, Sophia had shown unusual talent. By 12, she was performing in youth competitions. By 17, she had been accepted to Juilliard on a full scholarship. Then life happened. Her mother got sick during Sophia's 2nd year of school. Her father had left years earlier, and there was no one else to help. Sophia had tried to balance caregiving and studying, but eventually the choice became clear. She withdrew from school, promising herself it would be temporary. That was 6 years ago. The door to the storage room swung open abruptly, startling Sophia out of her memory. "There you are," Mr. Reynolds said, looking harried. "I need you to come in early tonight. The Harrington party booked the entire East Wing, and they're arriving at 6 instead of 7. Sophia quickly shut her notebook. "Of course. I'll be ready." Mr. Reynolds paused, his expression softening slightly. "You know, I've never asked. What do you write in that notebook all the time?" Sophia tucked it back into her bag. "Just thoughts. Nothing important." He nodded, clearly not particularly interested in the answer. "Well, wear the black tie tonight instead of the bow tie. Mr. Harrington is very particular about these things." After he left, Sophia sighed deeply. Richard Harrington. Everyone in the service industry in New York knew that name, and not for good reasons. A tech billionaire with a reputation for being demanding and impatient, he was known for leaving enormous tips when pleased and getting servers fired when he wasn't. She had an hour now, not 2. Just enough time to freshen up in the employee bathroom and change into her evening uniform. As she splashed water on her face, Sophia looked at herself in the mirror. At 28, she still had youthful features, but there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was a student. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She tucked them back and straightened her shoulders. Just another shift, she told her reflection. Just one more day. But as she said it, a familiar ache settled in her chest. The same ache she felt whenever she passed a music store or heard a street performer playing classical pieces in the subway. The ache of a dream deferred for so long it was beginning to feel abandoned. By 5:30, the restaurant was transformed for the Harrington event. White roses adorned every table, candles were lit, and the lighting had been dimmed to create an intimate atmosphere. The grand piano had been moved to a more central location, and a small stage had been set up beside it. "He's bringing his own pianist," Tina told Sophia as they prepared the place settings. Some hotshot from Europe. Apparently, he's paying the guy more for one night than we make in a month. Sophia merely nodded, concentrating on getting the silverware placement exactly right. Don't you ever get angry about it? Tina asked, watching her. About how some people have so much they can throw money away while the rest of us can barely get by? Getting angry doesn't pay the bills, Sophia replied, though there had been a time when she'd felt that anger keenly. Now she was just too tired for it. The first guests began to arrive promptly at 6, and soon the East Wing was filled with the quiet murmur of expensive conversation. Men in tailored suits and women dripping in jewelry sipped champagne and laughed politely at each other's jokes. Sophia moved between them like a ghost, refilling glasses and removing empty plates, practiced in the art of being present without being noticed. Mr. Harrington himself arrived at 6:30, commanding attention the moment he walked through the door. Tall and imposing with silver-streaked dark hair, he moved with the confidence of someone who had never worried about money a day in his life. He greeted his guests warmly, but Sophia noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing everything. At 7:15, Mr. Reynolds approached Sophia with a concerned expression. "The pianist hasn't arrived," he whispered urgently. "Mr. Harrington is asking questions and I don't have answers. Did you try calling him?" Sophia asked. "His agent says he's been taken to the hospital. Food poisoning. We're trying to find a replacement, but on such short notice." He trailed off, running a hand through his thinning hair. Sophia glanced at the piano, then quickly away. Not her problem. She had tables to serve and a mother who needed her medicine refilled tomorrow. By 8 o'clock, the situation had grown tense. Dinner had been served, and the time when music should have been filling the space had come and gone. Mr. Harrington was visibly annoyed, tapping his fingers against his wine glass as he spoke with Mr. Reynolds. Sophia was clearing plates from a nearby table when she heard Mr. Harrington's voice rise slightly. "I don't care what it takes," he was saying. "This is unacceptable. My guests were promised entertainment." "I understand, sir," Mr. Reynolds replied, his forehead beaded with sweat. "We're doing everything we can." Sophia tried to make herself invisible as she gathered the last of the plates, but as she turned to leave, she felt someone's gaze on her. Looking up, she found herself locking eyes with Richard Harrington himself. There was a moment of silence, and then his eyes moved past her to the piano and back again. A calculating look crossed his face. "You," he said, pointing directly at Sophia. "Do you play?" The question caught her so off guard that she nearly dropped the stack of plates she was holding. "I what?" "The piano," he said impatiently, gesturing toward the Steinway. "Do you play it?" Every instinct told Sophia to say no, to shake her head and escape back to the kitchen. But something, perhaps the memory of those years of training or the weight of her abandoned dreams, made her hesitate just long enough. Mr. Reynolds jumped in, clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Harrington, Sophia is one of our waitstaff." "I'm sure she doesn't." "I asked her, not you," Harrington interrupted, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "Well, it's a simple question." The room had gone quiet. Dozens of eyes were now on Sophia, waiting. She felt a flush creeping up her neck. "I used to," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A triumphant smile spread across Harrington's face. "Excellent. You'll do." And just like that, Sophia's carefully constructed world began to unravel. I can't," Sophia stammered, suddenly aware of the weight of the plates in her hands and the stares of everyone in the room. "I'm working." "And now you're working at the piano," Harrington replied smoothly, as if the matter was already settled. He turned to Mr. Reynolds. "I'm sure you can spare one waitress for half an hour." Mr. Reynolds looked caught between his desire to please an important client and his concern for putting an employee in such an uncomfortable position. "Mr. Harrington, I don't think—" "Double whatever she makes tonight," Harrington interrupted, pulling out his wallet and placing several $100 bills on the table. "That should cover any inconvenience." Sophia felt her cheeks burn. Being ordered to perform like some kind of trained animal was humiliating enough, but having her compliance bought so casually made it worse. She opened her mouth to refuse to say that she wasn't for sale at any price when Mr. Reynolds caught her eye. The message was clear. This isn't a request. The man could make or break the restaurant with a single review. More importantly, he could cost people their jobs, including hers. "I haven't played in years," she said quietly. a last attempt at escape. Harrington waved this away. Like riding a bicycle, I'm sure. Isn't that right, everyone? There was a murmur of agreement from his guests, along with a few uncomfortable glances. At least some of them recognized the awkwardness of the situation. Take the plates from her, Harrington instructed a nearby server, who quickly relieved Sophia of her burden. Then he gestured toward the piano with a flourish. Your audience awaits. Sophia felt as if she were moving through a dream as she walked toward the piano. The short distance seemed to stretch endlessly. Her heart hammered in her chest and her palms were already sweating. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she'd played for anyone but herself. And even then, it had been on a cheap keyboard in her apartment, not a Steinway Grand in front of New York's elite. She sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly out of habit. The keys gleamed before her, pristine and intimidating. She placed her hands in her lap, trying to steady them as she stared at the instrument. What could she possibly play? Her mind raced through pieces she'd once known by heart, wondering which ones her fingers might still remember. Something simple, perhaps, a beginner's piece that wouldn't reveal how rusty she'd become. Well, Harrington's voice cut through her thoughts. We're waiting. A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. Sophia's embarrassment deepened. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness. She began with a simple C major scale just to test herself. The notes rang out clear and true. The action of the keys was perfect, responsive yet offering just enough resistance. This was an instrument worth tens of thousands of dollars, lovingly maintained. Nothing like the weathered upright she'd grown up with or the overworked practice pianos at school. Almost without conscious thought, her fingers began to move into the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was one of the first complex pieces she'd mastered as a teenager, and the muscle memory was still there. Buried beneath years of disuse, the gentle, dreamlike melody filled the room. Sophia kept her eyes fixed on the keys, too nervous to look up. She stumbled slightly on a transition, wincing internally at the mistake. But then something began to happen. As the piece progressed, her hands remembered more. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The music began to flow more naturally. By the time she reached the middle section where the piece builds in intensity, Sophia had forgotten about Harrington and his guests, forgotten about the restaurant and her double shift. She was lost in the music and the conversation between her fingers and the piano. This was why she had fallen in love with playing as a child, this sense of speaking a language more honest than words. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, to her surprise, applause broke out. Not polite, obligatory applause, but genuine appreciation. Sophia finally looked up and saw expressions of astonishment on many faces. Even Mr. Reynolds looked stunned. But it was Harrington's face that caught her attention. The smug satisfaction she'd expected was absent, replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or recognition, that was adequate, he said, though his tone belied the dismissiveness of his words. But I think you can do better. It was a challenge, not a compliment. Sophia should have been offended. Instead, she felt something stir inside her, pride, perhaps. Or defiance. Without waiting for further prompting, she launched into Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was a far more technically demanding piece, one that had once been the centerpiece of her repertoire. A piece that told a story, beginning with a gentle, questioning theme that gradually built to a passionate, almost violent climax before resolving in a flurry of notes that demanded every ounce of skill a pianist possessed. The first few measures were hesitant. Her fingers stumbled over passages that had once been second nature, but as she continued, something remarkable happened. It was as if a door long closed was slowly opening inside her. Memories flooded back, not just of the notes, but of the feeling behind them. The hours of practice, the joy of mastery, the way her teacher had described this piece as a journey from innocence to experience. By the midpoint of the ballade, Sophia was playing with an intensity that surprised even her. Her body swayed slightly with the music, her face reflecting the emotion of each phrase. When she reached the coda, that famously difficult conclusion that had once taken her months to perfect, her fingers flew across the keys with a precision and passion that belied her years away from serious practice. The final chord hung in the air like a question. Sophia sat motionless, breathing hard, suddenly aware of what she'd just done. The silence that followed was profound. Then someone started to clap. Then another person. And another. Soon the entire room was filled with applause, some guests even rising to their feet. "Brava!" called a woman near the front, her diamond necklace catching the light as she stood. Absolutely magnificent. Sophia felt lightheaded. The rush of performing again, something she'd convinced herself she'd never experience again, was overwhelming. She looked over at Harrington, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He stood and approached the piano, the room quieting as he moved. "Where did you study?" he asked without preamble. Sophia hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Juilliard." For almost 2 years, a murmur went through the crowd. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. "And now you're waiting tables at the Silver Spoon." It wasn't a question, but an observation. "Life happens," Sophia replied simply, unwilling to share her personal struggles with this man who had ordered her to perform like a circus animal. "Indeed it does," he agreed, studying her with new interest. "Play something else." This time it wasn't a command but a request. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Sophia should have stood up then. Should have thanked him for the opportunity and returned to her job. The reasonable part of her brain was screaming at her to do exactly that. But another part, the part that had been silenced for 5 long years, was wide awake now and hungry for more. She turned back to the piano and began to play again. This time she chose something from memory, a piece she'd been composing during her 2nd year at Juilliard. It was unfinished, a work in progress that had been abandoned along with her studies. But the notes came back to her now, and with them new ideas. As she played, she began to improvise, completing phrases she'd left hanging years ago, adding depth and complexity to the simple melody. It was like having a conversation with her younger self, picking up where they'd left off. The piece was melancholy, but not without hope. A reflection of her journey from the bright promises of youth to the compromises of adulthood, but with a suggestion that the story wasn't over yet. When she finished, the applause was warm but more subdued, as if the audience sensed the personal nature of what they'd just witnessed. "Your own composition?" Harrington asked. Sophia nodded, suddenly feeling vulnerable. She'd never shared her own music with strangers before. "Interesting," he said, and there was genuine respect in his voice now. He glanced at his watch. "Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we take a short break before dessert is served." "Miss Martinez," Sophia supplied. "Sophia Martinez." "Ms. Martinez," he continued, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." In private, it wasn't really a question. Sophia looked around for Mr. Reynolds, who gave her a small nod, silently giving permission for her to step away from her duties. As she stood from the piano bench, her legs felt weak. The emotional and physical exertion of playing so intensely after so long had drained her. But there was also a strange exhilaration coursing through her veins. For the first time in years, she had been seen. Really seen, not as a waitress, not as a caretaker, but as a musician. And now one of the richest men in New York wanted to speak with her alone. Sophia followed Harrington toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, wondering what exactly had just changed in her carefully constructed life. Harrington led Sophia to a small alcove near the back of the restaurant. It was a cozy space with 2 leather armchairs normally reserved for guests waiting for their tables. He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair opposite. For a moment he simply studied her, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Sophia fought the urge to fidget under his gaze. She'd changed out of her good clothes hours ago, and her work uniform, a white button-up shirt and black slacks, was wrinkled from her long shift. A strand of hair had escaped her bun and hung by her cheek. She resisted the urge to tuck it away, not wanting to appear nervous. "You have remarkable talent," Harrington finally said. "That much is obvious. What's less clear is why someone with your abilities is carrying plates instead of playing concert halls." The question stung, even though she'd asked herself the same thing on countless sleepless nights. "As I said, life happens." "Yes, you mentioned that." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm curious about what specifically happened to derail such promising potential." Sophia bristled at his tone. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, that's personal." "Fair enough." He nodded, surprising her with his easy acceptance. "Let me be more direct, then. Are you happy waiting tables?" "Happiness isn't always the point," she replied. "Sometimes you do what you have to do." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps. I understand necessity better than you might think, Ms. Martinez. I wasn't born wealthy. Sophia doubted that his understanding of necessity matched hers, but she kept that thought to herself. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, Mr. Harrington? I should get back to work. Yes, there is. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the small table between them. I'd like to offer you an opportunity. She eyed the card skeptically. What kind of opportunity? I host regular events at my home and various venues around the city. Private gatherings, charity functions, that sort of thing. I'm always looking for exceptional talent to provide entertainment. He paused. The pay would be significantly better than what you make here. Sophia's heart sank. This wasn't about her music at all. Just another rich man looking to show off an exotic find to his equally rich friends. The talented waitress rescued from obscurity to play background music at cocktail parties. Thank you for the offer, she said stiffly, but I'm not interested in being a novelty act. Harrington looked genuinely surprised. A novelty act? Is that what you think I'm proposing? Isn't it? The waitress who can play Chopin makes for an interesting conversation starter at your next dinner party, I'm sure. His surprise gave way to amusement. You have a sharp tongue when you're not carrying plates, Ms. Martinez. I have bills to pay, Mr. Harrington, if you'll excuse me. She started to rise. What if I could help you get back to Juilliard? The words froze her in place. She slowly sank back into her seat. What? I sit on the board of trustees, he said simply. And I know the dean of music personally. If you're as good as I think you are, and that was evident from just a few minutes at the piano, I could make some calls. Sophia stared at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or deceit. Finding none, she felt a dangerous spark of hope, which she quickly suppressed. Why would you do that for someone you just met? She asked carefully. Harrington considered the question. I'm a businessman, Ms. Martinez. I recognize untapped value when I see it. Your talent is being wasted here. That's inefficient, and I dislike inefficiency. So this is what? An investment? If you like, he smiled slightly. Though my financial advisor would probably disagree with that assessment. Sophia looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just flown over piano keys as if the past 5 years had never happened. Hands that had been washing dishes and carrying trays instead of creating music. The thought made her chest ache. I can't just drop everything and go back to school, she said quietly. I have responsibilities. The financial kind or the personal kind? She looked up, startled by his perceptiveness. Both. Harrington nodded as if this confirmed something. Tell me about these responsibilities. Sophia hesitated. She guarded her private life carefully, especially at work. Her colleagues knew she had a sick mother, but little else. Sharing personal details with this stranger felt wrong. And yet if there was even a sliver of a chance, my mother has MS, she said finally. It's progressive. When I was in my second year at Juilliard, she had a bad flare-up. My father wasn't in the picture, and there was no one else to take care of her. So I made a choice. A difficult one, I imagine. Not really, Sophia replied honestly. She sacrificed everything for me growing up. Worked 3 jobs to pay for my piano lessons. Spent hours driving me to competitions. It wasn't even a question. And how is she now? Stable, but she needs regular care. I work double shifts to afford her medication and a part-time home health aide. Sophia straightened her shoulders. So you see, going back to school isn't an option. But thank you for the thought. Harrington was quiet for a moment, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the armrest. It reminded Sophia of someone working out a rhythm on piano keys. What if we could make it work? He asked finally. What if the financial and caregiving aspects could be addressed? Sophia gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Unless you're offering to pay for both my tuition and my mother's care, I don't see how. That's exactly what I'm offering. The words hung in the air between them. Sophia felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. That's crazy, she stammered. You don't even know me. I know enough, he countered. I know you have extraordinary talent. I know you abandoned a promising career to care for family, which speaks to your character. And I know that investing in exceptional people usually yields exceptional returns. What kind of returns exactly? Sophia asked, suddenly suspicious. What do you want from me? Harrington seemed to appreciate her directness. 3 things. First, I want you to audition properly for the faculty at Juilliard. If they agree with my assessment of your talent, you'll re-enroll and complete your degree. And the second thing, During breaks and holidays, you'll perform at a select number of events that I host. Consider it an internship of sorts, a chance to network with people who can help your career. It sounded reasonable enough, though Sophia was still wary. And the third? When you graduate, you'll give a public recital. All proceeds will go to a foundation I'm establishing to help musicians facing financial hardships. He smiled slightly. I'm hoping your story will inspire others. Sophia sat back, trying to process what she was hearing. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why me? She asked. There are thousands of talented musicians out there, many who are struggling. Why offer this to someone you heard play for 5 minutes at a dinner party? Harrington's expression changed, becoming more personal than she'd seen it yet. Do you believe in serendipity, Ms. Martinez? Not particularly. My mother was a pianist, he said unexpectedly. Not professionally, she never had the opportunity, but she played beautifully. That Chopin ballade you performed was her favorite piece. Sophia didn't know what to say to that. She died last year, Harrington continued. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick, at least. When I heard you play tonight. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. Let's just say it felt significant. The revelation changed something in the air between them. This wasn't just a wealthy man's whim or a business transaction. There was something more personal at work. I'm sorry about your mother, Sophia said softly. Thank you. He straightened, his businesslike demeanor returning. So what do you say to my proposal? Sophia's mind raced. If this was real, if he actually meant what he was offering, it would change everything. She could finish her degree. Her mother would get better care. She could play again, really play. Not just stolen moments on a cheap keyboard, but there had to be a catch. There always was. I'd need to think about it, she said cautiously. And I'd want everything in writing. Clear terms about what's expected from both sides. Harrington nodded approvingly. Smart. I'll have my lawyer draw up an agreement tomorrow. We can meet to discuss the details once you've had time to consider. He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Sophia rose as well, feeling slightly dazed. One more thing, Harrington said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a check and handed it to her. For tonight's performance. Sophia looked down at the check and nearly gasped. The amount was more than she made in 2 months at the restaurant. I can't accept this, she said, trying to hand it back. You provided a service. This is payment for that service. His tone made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Think of it as a down payment on our potential arrangement. Before she could respond, a commotion from the main dining area caught their attention. One of Harrington's guests appeared in the doorway of the alcove. Richard, you simply must bring your pianist back, the woman said excitedly. Everyone's asking for an encore. She's not my pianist, Vivian, Harrington corrected. But I believe Ms. Martinez might be willing to play one more piece before she leaves. That is, if she feels so inclined. He looked at Sophia with a raised eyebrow, giving her the choice. In that moment, looking at the check in her hand and thinking about his offer, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Like a door long closed was cracking open, letting in a sliver of light. I think I could play one more, she said, tucking the check carefully into her pocket. As she followed Harrington and his friend back to the main room, where the piano waited, Sophia felt both terrified and exhilarated. Everything could change after tonight. Everything. The question was whether she was brave enough to let it. The next morning, Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. For a moment she lay still, trying to determine if the events of the previous night had been real or just an elaborate dream. The check on her nightstand, the one she'd stared at for nearly an hour before finally going to sleep, confirmed it had all actually happened. She reached for her phone and saw 3 missed calls from Tina and a text that read, Everyone is talking about last night. Call me! Sophia set the phone down without responding. She wasn't ready to talk about it yet, not even with her closest friend at work. How could she explain what had happened when she barely understood it herself? After her encore, a rendition of Liszt's Liebestraum that had felt like flying, Harrington had given her his private number and told her to call when she'd made her decision. No pressure, he'd said, but he'd need to know within a week. A week to decide whether to completely change the course of her life. To trust a stranger with her future. Sophia swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, wincing at the soreness in her back and feet from yesterday's double shift. The small apartment was quiet. Her mother would still be asleep. The new medication often made her drowsy in the mornings. She padded to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, her mind racing. What would her mother say about Harrington's offer? Rosa Martinez had always been Sophia's biggest supporter, had sacrificed everything for her daughter's music education. But she was also fiercely independent and suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. The coffee maker gurgled as Sophia leaned against the counter, considering her options. She could turn Harrington down, continue with her life exactly as it was, safe, predictable, exhausting, or she could say yes and watch everything change, risky, unknown, exhilarating. A soft noise from the hallway interrupted her thoughts. Her mother appeared in the doorway, leaning on her walker. "You're up early," Rosa observed, making her way slowly to the kitchen table. "I thought you'd sleep in after working so late." "Couldn't sleep," Sophia replied, pouring 2 cups of coffee. She added a splash of milk to her mother's cup, the way she'd taken it for as long as Sophia could remember. "Something happened at work?" Rosa asked, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. Sophia hesitated, then sat down across from her mother. "You could say that." She told her everything, being forced to play the piano, Harrington's offer, the check sitting on her nightstand. Throughout the telling, Rosa's expression remained thoughtful, giving nothing away. "And what do you think about this offer?" she asked when Sophia finished. "I don't know what to think," Sophia admitted. "It seems too good to be true. Often when something seems that way it is," Rosa said, taking a sip of her coffee. "What does this man want in return?" "He says he just wants me to finish school, play at some of his events, and give a charity recital when I graduate." Sophia shrugged. "But there has to be more to it, right? People don't just hand out opportunities like this." "Some do," Rosa said, "though they're rare." She studied her daughter's face. "You want to say yes?" It wasn't a question, but Sophia answered anyway. "I think I do. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of everything changing. Of it not working out. Of leaving you when you need me." Rosa reached across the table and took Sophia's hand. "Mihika, I have never wanted to be the reason you gave up your dreams." "You're not," Sophia protested. "It was my choice. A choice you shouldn't have had to make." Rosa's voice was firm. "Do you think I haven't seen how you look at that old keyboard in your room? How you still move your fingers in your sleep like you're playing? How the light went out of your eyes when you left school?" Sophia looked down, unable to meet her mother's gaze. "I don't regret it." "I know you don't, but I've regretted it every day." Rosa squeezed her hand. "If this man is offering you a chance to get back what you lost, you should take it. But what about your care? The medical bills? From what you've told me, he's offering to help with that too." Rosa smiled wryly. Perhaps his motives aren't entirely pure. Perhaps he wants to feel like a hero, or add another success story to his collection. "But does that matter if it gives you your music back?" Sophia considered this. "I guess not. But what if it's all just talk? Rich people make promises all the time, then get it in writing like you said you would." Rosa had always been practical. "And if he doesn't follow through, you'll be exactly where you are now. You lose nothing by trying." They talked for another hour, going over every angle, every potential pitfall. By the time they finished their second cups of coffee, Sophia had made her decision. She called Harrington later that morning. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Ms. Martinez," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Have you had time to consider my offer?" "I have," she replied. "I'd like to accept pending review of the written agreement we discussed." "Excellent. I'll have the papers delivered to you this afternoon. Would tomorrow be too soon to visit Juilliard? I've spoken with Dean Wilson and he's eager to hear you play." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Tomorrow? But I'm scheduled to work." "I've already spoken with Mr. Reynolds. He understands you'll be taking a leave of absence." "You did what?" Sophia felt a flash of annoyance. "Mr. Harrington, with all due respect, you can't just rearrange my life without consulting me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're absolutely right. That was presumptuous of me. I apologize." The apology surprised her. From what she'd heard about Richard Harrington, he wasn't a man who admitted mistakes easily. "I can call Mr. Reynolds back and tell him you'll discuss your schedule with him directly," he offered. Sophia sighed. "No, it's fine. But in the future, I'd appreciate if you'd talk to me before making arrangements on my behalf." Noted. He sounded amused rather than offended. So tomorrow at 11? I can send a car. I can take the subway, she said quickly. The meeting is at my office first, not the school. Upper East Side. The subway would take you over an hour, Sophia relented. Fine, a car is fine. Perfect. And Miss Martinez, bring your mother if she'd like to come. Dean Wilson mentioned they have an excellent accessibility team that can accommodate her needs. The thoughtfulness of the gesture wasn't lost on Sophia. I'll ask her. Thank you. After hanging up, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the cheap keyboard in the corner of her room. She hadn't touched it in weeks, too exhausted from work to do more than look at it longingly before falling into bed each night. Now she moved toward it and turned it on. The electronic hum as it powered up was nothing like the rich resonance of the Steinway she'd played last night. But it was familiar, comforting. She placed her fingers on the plastic keys and began to play. Not Chopin or Debussy or Liszt, but simple scales and exercises. The building blocks that every pianist returned to, no matter how advanced they became. Her fingers were stiff at first, but gradually loosened as she worked through the patterns she'd learned as a child. She'd need to practice intensively if she was going to audition for the faculty at Juilliard. The thought was terrifying, but also thrilling. The next day, promptly at 10:30 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment building. The driver, a kind-faced older man named Paul, helped Rosa into the back seat with her walker and carefully stowed it in the trunk. Mr. Harrington sends his apologies, Paul told them as he navigated through morning traffic. He's been delayed at another meeting and will meet you at Juilliard instead of his office. Sophia nodded, secretly relieved. It would be easier to face the school first without Harrington watching her reaction. As they drove through the city, Rosa reached over and took Sophia's hand. Nervous? Terrified, Sophia admitted. What if they laugh me out of the room? It's been 5 years, Mama. 5 years without proper training or practice. But not without music in your heart, Rosa replied. That never left you. When they arrived at the familiar limestone building on Broadway, Sophia felt a wave of nostalgia so powerful it nearly took her breath away. How many times had she walked through those doors full of purpose and ambition? How many hours had she spent in the practice rooms, perfecting a phrase or struggling with a difficult passage? Paul helped Rosa out of the car, and together they made their way slowly up the accessible ramp to the entrance. Inside, the busy main hall looked exactly as Sophia remembered. Students rushing between classes, instrument cases strapped to their backs, the distant sound of someone practicing a difficult violin passage echoing from somewhere down the corridor. Sophia? She turned to see a familiar face, Dr. Chen, her former piano instructor, approaching with a warm smile. I thought it was you, he said, taking her hands in his. Richard called me yesterday. I could hardly believe it. Sophia blinked back unexpected tears. Dr. Chen, it's good to see you. And this must be your mother, he said, turning to Rosa with a respectful nod. I've heard so much about you over the years. All good things, I hope, Rosa replied with a smile. The very best. Your daughter was one of my most promising students. He looked back at Sophia, and could be again from what Richard tells me. Before Sophia could respond, a tall figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Richard Harrington, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, was walking toward them, accompanied by an older man Sophia recognized as Dean Wilson. Ah, you found each other, Harrington said as they approached. Excellent. Dr. Chen has agreed to sit in on your audition if that's all right with you. Audition? The word made Sophia's stomach clench. This was really happening. Of course, she managed to say. It's an honor. Dean Wilson stepped forward to introduce himself to both Sophia and Rosa. We've prepared the recital hall for you, he told Sophia. Take as much time as you need to warm up. As they walked through the familiar corridors, Sophia felt as if she were moving through a dream. Students stopped to stare as they passed, not at her but at Harrington, whose face regularly appeared in business magazines and newspapers. She wondered what they thought of this strange procession. The famous billionaire, the dean, the former professor, the woman with the walker, and her. The recital hall was smaller than the main performance space, but still impressive with its perfect acoustics and beautiful Steinway concert grand on the stage. Sophia approached it with a mixture of reverence and terror. Would you like us to step out while you warm up? Dr. Chen asked kindly. Sophia shook her head. No, I'll just play. She looked at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. As she sat at the piano adjusting the bench to the right height, Sophia felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, whether they accepted her or rejected her, whether Harrington's offer was genuine or had some hidden catch, in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged. She began to play. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the audience filling the seats, row after row of people in elegant evening wear, their conversations creating a gentle hum that filled the space. 5 minutes, Ms. Martinez, the stage manager said, checking something off on his clipboard. Sophia nodded, unable to speak. She smoothed down the front of her gown, a deep blue silk that complemented her skin tone perfectly. It had been a gift from Rosa, who had insisted on buying it despite the cost. "My daughter's first concert at Carnegie Hall deserves something special," she'd said, brushing aside Sophia's protests. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of Sophia's life. After her audition at Juilliard, where she'd played Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata with a raw, emotional intensity that had left Dr. Chen with tears in his eyes, she'd been immediately readmitted to the program. Harrington had kept his word, arranging for Rosa's care and covering all expenses related to Sophia's education. The transition hadn't been easy. After years away from serious study, Sophia had struggled to keep up with the demanding curriculum. Her fingers, no longer conditioned for hours of practice, had developed painful blisters. There were nights when she'd cried from frustration, convinced she'd made a terrible mistake, but gradually things had improved. Her technique came back stronger than before. Her musical interpretation matured, informed by the life she'd lived outside the conservatory bubble. Her professors noticed the difference. "You play like someone who understands loss," Dr. Chen had told her after a particularly moving performance. "That can't be taught." True to their agreement, Sophia had played at several of Harrington's events during school breaks. These performances had connected her with influential people in the music world: conductors, artistic directors, patrons of the arts. Doors that had once seemed permanently closed were beginning to open. And now here she was, about to make her debut at one of the world's most prestigious concert venues. The recital had been Harrington's idea, scheduled to coincide with the launch of his new foundation, the Rosa Martinez Fund for Musical Education, named after the woman who had sacrificed so much for her daughter's talent. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She'd never played for an audience this size before. What if she froze? What if her mind went blank in the middle of a piece? A gentle hand touched her arm. She turned to find Rosa sitting in her wheelchair, looking up at her with a proud smile. "You look pale," her mother said. "Breathe, mija. What if I mess up?" Sophia whispered. "All those people. Then you'll keep playing, just like you've kept going through everything else." Rosa reached up to straighten the simple silver pendant hanging around Sophia's neck, her grandmother's, worn for luck. "Remember what I always told you?" Sophia smiled despite her nerves. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest." "Exactly." Rosa squeezed her hand. "Now go be honest with them." The stage manager appeared again. "It's time, Ms. Martinez." With one last look at her mother, Sophia walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was polite but curious. Most of the audience had come because of Harrington's reputation and the foundation's publicity, not because they knew her work. She made her way to the gleaming concert grand in the center of the stage and took a moment to adjust the bench. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she spotted Harrington in the front row. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. Next to him sat Mr. Reynolds and Tina from the restaurant, both looking slightly out of place but beaming with pride. Harrington had insisted on inviting them, saying they were part of Sophia's story, and they were. Everyone in this room was part of the winding path that had led her here. From the teacher who had first noticed her talent as a child, to the wealthy man who had ordered her to play at his dinner party, to the mother who had never stopped believing in her. Sophia placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Her program was ambitious: Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, and Rachmaninoff in the first half, her own compositions in the second. As she moved through the pieces, her initial nervousness faded, replaced by the pure joy of making music in a space designed to celebrate it. Every note rang true, Every phrase told a story. When she reached the Chopin Ballade, the piece she'd played that fateful night at the Silver Spoon, she glanced briefly at Harrington. His expression was unreadable, but she thought she saw him blink rapidly as if fighting emotion. The intermission came and went. When Sophia returned to the stage for the second half, she felt a shift in the audience's energy. They were no longer simply curious, they were engaged, eager to hear what came next. For the remainder of tonight's program, she said, speaking into the microphone for the first time, I'll be performing original compositions. The first piece is called Interrupted Journey, and it's dedicated to my mother, Rosa Martinez. The piece began softly with a simple, hopeful melody that gradually became more complex and troubled, before finding its way back to resolution, a musical representation of her life's unexpected detours and eventual return to her path. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted in applause. Sophia saw her mother in the wings, tears streaming down her face. The rest of the concert passed in a blur of music and emotion. When Sophia played her final piece, a new composition called Second Chances that she'd completed just weeks before, she felt as if she were floating above the piano, watching her hands move across the keys as if they belonged to someone else. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. Sophia bowed again and again, overwhelmed by the response. She accepted a bouquet of white roses from a stagehand and gestured toward the wings where Rosa was watching. The applause grew even louder as an assistant helped wheel her mother onto the stage. Afterward, at the reception in the hall's elegant atrium, Sophia found herself surrounded by well-wishers and music critics eager to discuss her performance. Several people pressed business cards into her hand, mentioning recording contracts and international tours. Quite a change from carrying plates, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind her. Sophia turned to find Harrington watching her with a mixture of pride and amusement. Just a bit, she agreed with a smile. I never properly thanked you. No need, he said. Your playing tonight was thanks enough. He looked around at the crowd. What do you think? Was it worth taking a chance on a stranger's offer? I'm still deciding, Sophia teased. Then, more seriously, the foundation is an incredible gift. My mother can't stop crying every time someone mentions it. It was her idea, you know, Harrington said. When I asked what she wanted in return for letting me steal her daughter away from the restaurant, Sophia looked surprised. She never told me that. She said there were too many talented young musicians who couldn't afford proper training. Too many families making impossible choices. He shrugged. It made sense to me. Before Sophia could respond, a tall woman in an elegant black dress approached them. Ms. Martinez, your performance was extraordinary, she said with a slight French accent. I'm the artistic director for the Paris Symphony Orchestra, and we're planning a series featuring emerging pianists next season. I'd love to discuss the possibility of your participation. As the conversation continued, Sophia caught sight of her mother across the room, surrounded by a small group of admirers. Rosa was animatedly telling a story, probably the one about how Sophia had tried to fix their old piano with crayons when she was 4. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Sophia found a quiet moment with Tina and Mr. Reynolds. I can't believe you used to wash dishes with these hands, Tina said, shaking her head in wonder. You were wasted at that restaurant. I don't know, Sophia replied thoughtfully. I think that time gave me something important. A different perspective. Well, we're short a waitress now, Mr. Reynolds joked. But I suppose you won't be coming back to fill the position, Sophia laughed. Probably not, but I'll always be grateful for my time there. If I hadn't been working that night, they all knew how the sentence ended. If she hadn't been working that night, Harrington would never have heard her play. She would still be carrying plates and working double shifts, her talent hidden away. One chance encounter had changed everything. One moment when her two worlds had collided. As the evening drew to a close, Sophia found herself alone at the piano on the now empty stage. The cleaning crew would be coming soon, but she'd asked for a few more minutes in the hall. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. Tomorrow, her picture would be in the arts section of several newspapers. Critics would debate her technique and interpretation. Offers would begin coming in from around the world. But for now, in this moment, it was just Sophia and the piano, exactly as it had been when she was a child, before dreams of fame or success, when she played simply because the music inside her needed to come out. She began to play softly, not one of the complex pieces from her program, but a simple lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The melody echoed in the empty hall, a gentle reminder of where she'd come from and who she was at her core. A movement in the wings caught her eye. Rosa had wheeled herself back to watch, a peaceful smile on her face. "Ready to go home?" Sophia called. "In a minute," Rosa replied. "I'm enjoying the view." Sophia smiled and continued playing, the music flowing from her fingers like water. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Her journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But tonight, in this perfect moment between what had been and what would be, Sophia Martinez was exactly where she belonged. The waitress with hidden genius had finally found her way back to herself. And that, she thought as the final notes of the lullaby floated up to the ceiling of Carnegie Hall, was the most beautiful music of all.